All righty. All righty now. Well, uh, Willkommen, folks. Today, it's mainly about the Chris Arthur article, The Concept of Money, which is in Radical Philosophy. Oh, welcome to This and That. I don't think there's newbies here, so it's the same shit, different day. Um, there's a journal called Radical Philosophy, actually a very good journal. It has been good because it allows some people who have sort of off the wall stuff to get their work published before having to claw their way through the regular philosophical journals. And uh, the point I sort of want to make with this a slight diversion, it's not really a diversion. Chris Arthur is the same guy who Higginbottom reads for some of his stuff for his treatment of capital. So this is not unusual to make this slight sideways digression. But it is a specific article, and his other work is great too, Chris Arthur's work. But this is a work on the concept of money. So we're still in the political economy ballpark. But I think we have to make a slight detour to Hegel. And the reason why is because actually everybody else makes that digression to Hegel. Zizek does that. This one little 17-minute intro to Hegel that I'm going to show is actually one of the relatively more intelligible, quick and dirty versions of Hegel. And I hope that it's useful to you because, and not that necessarily that you're going to read more Hegel. Hegel is very complicated and annoying in some ways. But and I managed to seize a copy of Peter Singer's brief, very short introduction to Hegel, which is one of those little in its physical form is one of those little pocketbook things. That's always good if you have to go to jury duty, which I have to do soon. It's a kind of book that you can slip in your back pocket or whatever and read at your leisure, even though it's incredibly complicated. So anyway, Peter Singer is one of our the great philosophers. If there are great philosophers for the 21st century, Peter Singer is one of them, unlike Jordan Peterson. So I have that, and I'll upload that into files in Discord, and it's really even difficult on this planet to be even called a Hegel scholar. There are Hegel scholars on this planet, but it's just God, mind-numbing and mind-boggling. And in order to get there, our little 17-minute introduction, aside from having a commercial built into the presentation, which I'll try and skip, he gets us back to having to read Aristotle and a bunch of other crap. So it is a lot of stuff, and it's just important to have that kind of philosophy because Marx, as we know, did his work initially on Hegelian or materialism of a sort, and worked through the critique of Hegel, and Hegel being kind of the Richard Rorty of the time. And, this is like a BFD to sort of say, well, I've studied all this stuff, and, it's time for us to go move in another direction. And I am going to stake out my claim to invert Hegelianism, to make Hegelianism intelligible to reality, which for a lot of people is, a big problem. It's annoying. It challenges the existing political order, but it is why Marx reads Hegel. And of course, he's fighting with Hegelians, people who are Hegelian groupies. Not a doo-wop group called the Young Hegelians, but there should be one. I think there is actually a group called the Young Hegelians just because of the joke, much like there is or was a group called Trotsky Ice Pick. So, we all have our little jokes. Anyway, the point of money, this all gets us back to money. And I would assert, and we're gonna, if it doesn't become more intelligible to me, I don't see why I should share the unintelligibility with you. But this Chris Arthur article makes some sense, even though it is written, in a philosophy journal. to explicate some of the things that Marx never quite got to. That is the whole Marx on money, Duboff and all the other people talking about money, and then ultimately modern money theory, which we're not going to talk about. But the all of the stuff that points towards where even we are in the 21st century on modern money theory is actually still rooted in these basic sets of questions about how does money operate as an abstraction. And one way of getting at that issue is to think about, this relation, this abstract relation that has been created for money. So if we recall, Marx sort of introduces the idea of the commodity, tries to work it out in terms of, what is everyday life like, and what did we do before we sort of had money, or how did we get money? But he doesn't sort of focus on money. He focuses instead on commodities. So he trundles on and then says, well, it reaches this point where it gets even more abstract, and we're trading off our work or our physical energy for money. And money is equally attempts to be universal, that it's exchangeable. It has a kind of, it has value that can be applied in a multiplicity of areas. But as we've discovered, and as you will have discovered if you've done it, even the modicum of travel, that value is not stable. As stable as we'd like to think of it in our everyday life. You walk downtown and you want to go buy something, and you have some money in your pocket, or actual cash, as opposed to a credit card. You sort of say, well, okay, this is what it's worth, and blah, 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 blah. But this whole question of how you think of it or how you experience it is still, on the one hand, it's quite normal. We just do stuff, and now you can do even more absurd things like waving your credit card at the terminal, which I find even more insecure. And frankly, all my cards are in an RFID protected wallet. I just I carry around a Faraday cage with me, because this is a problem. It is so abstract that unless you have RFID protection, radio frequency, whatever, some sort of Faraday cage, somebody's going to steal your stuff. Let's put it that way. So there's this diagram that is in Chris Arthur's article. I haven't gotten to the Hegel yet. We'll get there, but the Hegel underlies this. A syllogism of value about the universality of money. So this is the diagram in Arthur's article. And the difference that we've been looking at in Marx is the difference between universals, things that are, more widely, more generalizable, and things that are more specific or particulars. And the particularity in this particular case is, how much money for whatever it's a single commodity. And of course, the abstract relation to that in terms of particularity is whether you have enough money. The singularity in terms of amount of money. And then there is this other feature. This all seems horribly complicated for a simple transaction if you're going to buy a stick of gum in the convenience store. Noting, of course, though, that there is variability in there. That's why there's, as I keep mentioning, the little dish of pennies. And, that may seem, uncontroversial to you if you've ever been in a convenience store and there's a little dish of pennies. But that's kind of shows a bunch of things, and not to make too much of it, but it shows that there are the material reality is problematic, particularly if you don't have enough money, or if you're only close, or if you're not close enough, and that's a whole other set of issues, which is actually kind of interesting, especially in a convenience store. But yes, the convenience store is my standard analogy for looking at a consumer society, because it is probably one of the more problematic elements of a consumer society. But anyway, you have the syllogism of value up there in italics, and at the bottom there, you have the judgment of price. How much does it cost? And that's not the same as what is it being priced at. You'll find that there's actually subtle distinctions among all these elements. And then the further questions that may pop up, what is its worth? That is, the value of this commodity is £3. And, that's fine. But you can get in a shitload of trouble if you don't have £3 and you only have $3, and you're in England, and let's say, and you don't have £3, you only have $3. And, the person behind the counter says, well, mate, that's just, you can't, I can't do this for you. It's just, whatever. And it's just fascinating. Because in some ways, the exchange is pretty much, all the activities are pretty much the same. All these other things are bizarre abstractions. And, there are other variations, other predicates possible, certainly. But I won't mention those. Anyway, so Chris Arthur talks about, the ability of money to make opposites embrace. So this is just another one of those little antagonisms. I must have money in order to get certain things if I want to eat or whatever, sustenance or subsistence. And, I need to make these system of exchanges. And so what Arthur is trying to work through, and makes it sound incredibly complicated. And I know this is a problematic detail for some people, but this solves what we were talking about yesterday. Is labor located as a function of production, or is labor in this, is it more about exchange? Is it more about distribution? And this endless little ostensibly circular argument, when you come up against Marx, is one that there are hills that people die on for this stuff, and it is just stupid that they do. But you need to sort of understand the multiplicity of perspectives, I think, in order to be a good Marxist. I think you understand, okay, well, there's this sort of whole productionist kind of thing, and it's a long history, and it's still there, that we worry about, and maybe we can change this, and maybe we can do other kinds of things, rhetorically speaking, seize the means of production, blah, 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 blah. But there's all these other variations that are part of the problem that Marx didn't quite get to, or that evolved since Marx, that we need to sort of deal with. Our relationship to the environment, our relationship to other people, all the other intersubjective problems, all those are there too. And so you need to have a handle on that. So understanding money is just one of the fundamental, I would assert, a foundational issue to understand that degree of abstraction, because that's what makes the whole damn thing move. And so, he doesn't go through what we were sort of doing, or at least brushing against. Orthodox readings of Marx place him in the former camp, but in truth, he's better understood as recognize the importance of money in shaping economic processes. However, here I do not enter into such exegetical disputes. I present my own take on the concept. So what Arthur's trying to do is, he's just trying to give us a little sense of what's going on when we begin to, have these little crises, these, ontological crises. I would assert, or at least cause trouble with the fact that I don't got to show you no stinking badges, is actually one example of a kind of interesting antagonism relative to an exchange of money. So let's start with Hegel. Understanding that German idealism is an important philosophical concept that leaks into, if speaking as an American, into American philosophy. The roots of any kind of, if you want to make a claim for an American pragmatism of some kind, of one kind or another, some of it goes to Hegel, some of it goes to a bunch of other things too. But there is a kind of the Hegelian idealism, or idealism, and then Hegel, sort of a subset of that, is sort of part of what motivates a lot of folks, and it you can see it, its residuals in sort of popular culture, as it were, and I would like to assert that it should not be complicated to refer to these sorts of things in order to exist in everyday life. And as with other 21st century things, I assert still that it's not unimportant, let's put it that way in a double negative, to read Zizek and other post-structural or neo-Marxian, blah, blah, blah. I'll read all of that because it still reflects on some of the very basic problems, some of the issues in which we have to come to grips with orthodoxy, heterodoxy, the correct action, making the right decisions, resisting hegemony, all those things are kind of still part of the same mechanism to be able to say, well, I think I can make a right choice here. I know what this means for me as a subject, and I know that other people believe in this with me, so that I believe in a collective whole that we can actually do stuff. And so with that basic proviso, I think it's important to have a little sense of who Hegel was. And, this may be mind-numbing, but I think if you've had some introductions to either some psychology or some basic philosophy or some just basic humanist stuff, this will become somewhat clear. And this guy explains it as good as anybody. So, I'm not sure there are very many people who can get this to work properly to make it intelligible. It's certainly clear that Zizek doesn't. Zizek just already assumes that you read Hegel, and it just moves on from there, and that's always troubling when you're reading people like Zizek. So let's try this, and if people seem a little lost or get irritated, we'll move on to something else. But today I just wanted to say money is interesting. Chris Arthur talks about money. It requires a little Hegel to think about it, and hopefully Hegel makes you think better about it, that money has this multiple set of moments when it operates, not simply in every consumer transaction, but as we will point out, as I will point out eventually at some moment, not this week, maybe next week or something, that there are these other forms beyond industrial capital that make our current lives quite problematic. That is financial capital, merchant capital, interest-bearing capital. All of those things, all these different capitals, are things we should have a better grip on if we're going to foster radical change.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. More about them in a bit. Only one man understood me, and even he didn't understand me. These were Hegel's last words, and they really truly represent the totality of his thought. Hegel as a philosopher has an incredibly robust reputation for being obscure, but this needn't be the case. In this video, I'm going to take you through the key ideas of Hegelian philosophy. I'll give you a brief overview of the philosopher and tell you how to begin your philosophical journey with Hegel. So, who was Hegel? Hegel was a German philosopher, born in the Holy Roman Empire and dying in the Kingdom of Prussia. He saw a great deal of events during his lifetime, including the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror, the rise of Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars, and the Industrial Revolution in England. He was born at a time which was the end of the Enlightenment and the beginning of the Romantic era. His philosophy truly reflects this transitional period and the act of transition between eras within all society. It took him many years to gain philosophical influence within society, but towards the end of his life, he became head of the University of Berlin and was renowned for his philosophy. Hegel's influence cannot be understated. Hegel influenced figures such as Kierkegaard, Marx, Heidegger, and Gadamer. However, with such fame comes infamy. Hegel is infamously obscure and very difficult to comprehend, and was famously criticized by none other than Arthur Schopenhauer, the pessimist philosopher who believed that Hegel was incomprehensible nonsense. The truth is, Hegel is not incomprehensible nonsense, but is difficult to read, especially for a beginner. So the first thing you need to do is understand the basis of Hegelian thought and where to start with his works. But first, a word from our sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant.org is the best new way to learn maths and computer science interactively. Brilliant has thousands of lessons from foundational to advanced maths, AI, data science, neural networks, and more, and new lessons are added monthly. My favorite course is on logic and deduction. Brilliant's gamified structure makes logic puzzles really fun and engaging. It helps with critical reasoning and can even help you learn syllogistic reasoning and propositional logic. One of the advantages I've found is that it offers an explanation if you don't understand why you are getting the question wrong, so that means you can learn even when you're incorrect. Logical skills are part of a well-rounded individual and can really aid you in avoiding propaganda and honing your critical thinking skills so that you can find truth the fastest way possible. So to try everything Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/perspectivephilosophy or click the link in the description, and the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Where to begin? not the phenomenology of spirit. Although considered his magnum opus, it is not his magnum opus and was actually his first major work. Hegel wrote the phenomenology of spirit when he was out of money and desperately trying to pay for his illegitimate child Ludwig. During this time, Hegel was facing extreme pressure, and the book, I think, reflects the pressure that he was under. No doubt it is an amazing piece of work, but the work reflects a younger man who hadn't fully developed his thought, and Hegel did not really develop his writing style until later in his life. If you are going to begin with Hegel, I would first recommend checking out some reader's guides. The most basic reader's guide I would recommend is Singer's Very Short Introduction to Hegel. It is a very brief overview of Hegel, and often in its brevity leads to some falsities, but will get you started. The next is maybe Norman's Introduction to the Phenomenology and David Rose's Reader's Guide to the Philosophy of Right. In terms of Hegel's primary works, I would recommend beginning not with the Phenomenology, but rather the Encyclopedia. The encyclopedias were written directly for students. They are not written for academics, which these other works were written towards. So this really means that Hegel is going out of his way to make his thoughts comprehensible. That being said, it is still very difficult and a very high level thought. So I do not recommend engaging with Hegel at all until you've read some philosophy. Do not start your philosophical journey with Hegel. You will probably want to claw your eyes out and never return to philosophy again. Read The Science of Logic in the Encyclopedia first, because that will give you the basis of Hegelian thought. The next is The Philosophy of Nature, which is akin to a philosophy of physics or a philosophy of natural science, in which he explains natural identities and how they form. It is important for Hegel's work, but not the most important for a beginner to understand, and so I would recommend maybe briefly going over the philosophy of nature and instead focus on getting to the philosophy of mind, which really does a good job at emphasizing the basis of the Hegelian system, which is spirit. I would say that the magnum opus for Hegel is either The Philosophy of Right, which was his last major work, or The Greater Logic, The Science of Logic, which is an amazing piece of work, but is written towards academics and includes a lot more than The Science of Logic or The Lesser Logic in the Encyclopedia. And so don't go to that first, go to the Encyclopedia. It is also worth mentioning that Hegel updated the Encyclopedia before his death in the last 10 years when he didn't produce any major works. So if you are looking in many ways for the most up-to-date version of Hegel's thought, it's going to be in the Lesser Logic anyway, and it is written far better. After those works, I would recommend The Phenomenology and The Philosophy of History. The Phenomenology is a brilliant work. It is, and it does culminate Hegel's thought, but it was the beginning of Hegel's career, not the end. Last but not least, I would certainly recommend checking out Hegel's lectures on the philosophy of history, which really show the development of the Hegelian idea that the state is spirit, to the point of world spirit, to the point of absolute spirit as moving through time, and not simply as a single instance of time. You don't need to read that first of all, and I would certainly go through the list and focus on the more central texts first of all. The key ideas to take away from Hegel. Hegel describes reason as spirit when the certainty of all reality has been raised as truth. Now, that might sound complicated, but it's actually really not. What he's saying is that reason, as that our capacity to rationalize, once it knows itself as all being or all truth, it knows itself as spirit. Spirit is the essence of existence, if you will. You see, Hegel believed that consciousness was the only thing that truly exists. Now, what did he mean by that? Hegel was coming off the back of this Kantian revolution in philosophy, in which Kant had demonstrated without a shadow of a doubt that the world could not be described via empiricism, and that materialism could not give an adequate account of reality. So Hegel is writing at a point in which mind's relationship to reality was cemented. The only way in which we can truly know reality was to apply categories, logical categories, which explained certain aspects of reality, such as space and time. These are Newtonian categories, scientific categories, from which Kant was defending. Hegel, unlike Kant, argued that these categories were not subjectively dependent, existing only in our minds, and instead existed in reality in itself. So space and time exist within an objective world. And Hegel agreed with the Aristotelian account that matter doesn't exist in itself, that there is no such thing as prime matter. Instead, matter is only that which holds a form, a concept, an idea. These ideas exist and we perceive them as concrete realities, and that is what we term material. And so we don't need to think of the world as material, but instead as idea. And this is what is called objective idealism. Hegel takes this point and argues that reality is fundamentally the self, building upon what he described as that absolute commandment given by the Oracle of Delphi to Socrates, know thyself. He argued that the truth of the self was the truth of reality in and of itself, meaning the absolute truth. But this absolute truth was not a subjectivity, but an objective subject. This means that there was an objective idea external to the agent. This objective idea, which includes the agent, is the divine idea. It's the idea in the mind of God. And this means that we are really fundamentally spirit. Think of this like the Holy Spirit, that which connects all things, the Father and the Son together. Okay, so Hegel is really arguing that what is the basis of all reality is consciousness coming to know itself. And this is spirit. It is instantiated in every single point in history and is slowly becoming. And so Hegel argued that the unified reality that we exist in is a thing thinking of itself for all of eternity. And this is God. Logic, or logos. The science of logic embarks to explain the development of identity in relation to itself, meaning that logic is the ontological, meaning the being which exists in reality. So it is not some sort of external concept such as matter or like some material or physical objects that exist. It is logic which gives those objects their meaning. And so what is underpinning everything is logical mechanism. And so we have the development of a process or a mechanistic explanation of reality. This procedural development of reality Hegel attributes to Heraclitus, a pre-Socratic philosopher who argued that logos was all that could truly be known, that which can describe the movement of being and non-being, a transitional phase between particulars. However, Hegel, like Plato and Aristotle, seen this as a single unified being, and he attributed this to the Trinity, the Christian God. And so Hegel argues that this procedural development can be explained through a Trinitarian account of reality, which Aristotle first described as the three figures of logic. This for Hegel leads to an absolute syllogism, which logically contains anything in its universality, its particularity, and in the synthesis between them, their individuality. These form three logical interconnecting parts which logically sustain themselves. And this can give you an explanation of an object in its universality, its species, its essence, its particularity, its concrete existence, and its individuality, its mediated concrete existence, which is a limited universal. This means for Hegel that truth is the bedrock of creation. So what we are witnessing is an already completed whole completing itself. So we are logically moving from paradigm to paradigm through thought, and this thought is developing through history with the contents of our thinking. And that does not just mean for Hegel the reflective thinking that we engage in, but rather that our very perceptions are developing. Right over good. The distinction between rightness and goodness, or ethics and morality, was first coined by Hegel. Hegel argues that we can separate that which is subjectively moral, the good, and that which is objectively moral, the right, and that one has an epistemological and so ontological basis in Hegel, where the other is merely speculative. It relies upon the reasoning of a single individual which has not yet been reviewed by their peers. And so this separates what is an individual's moral inclinations rather than something like lawfulness. Right in the German which Hegel is speaking of is legal rights. Hegel argues that we go from a single individual seeking a moral goal to a collective individual understanding their goal to be united with the goal of others within a lawful society. And so we gain an objective ethical system. And this system represents a system of drives from which people are trying to satisfy their needs, but also express what they believe to be justice within society. And so what happens is that various institutions form and mediate this conception of right. This progresses through history to lead to a more developed state, to the point in which you can establish laws, and the better the laws, the better the state. Very similar to Aristotle. Hegel also saw the importance of private property and of a well-functioning justice system. He thought that the mediation between civil authority and private interests were the basis of the state, the individual who's trying to get what he wants and trying to maintain a good life for him and his family, whilst expecting just treatment from his peers and wanting to give just treatment to his peers, ultimately leads to a well-formed society. And so this is a mediation between institutions which all have their own logical ends, yet in their unity form human life. And this is the same as in Aristotle. The human good contains both the good of medicine and the good of war, but they contradict each other except when taken together in the life of an individual who is trying to live a peaceful, harmonious life. This leads Hegel to be against poverty. He promotes corporations, but believes corporations should exist in a kind of family-like manner in which individuals are able to achieve their ends and able to express themselves, and also leads him to reject the developing capitalism in England. He wasn't against capitalism. Capitalism hadn't fully formed yet, but he was against putting other corporations out of business as the goal of another corporation, because you should care about those individuals who you are putting out of work. And he thought this was barbaric. Likewise, Hegel was also against tyranny. Dialectic. Hegel was very fond of history. In fact, the basis of Hegelian thought can really be shown to be classical. Hegel loved the classical era and argued that everything within Western civilization began in ancient Greece, and that this developed over time through what he calls the dialectic. The dialectic, or the lord and bondsman relationship, is the ethical basis in which society and philosophy develop. This is the development of the self. If I have a conception of self and you have a conception of self, Hegel shows this to be a conception of our desires to express and actualize ourselves. So it's not that I know what I am, it's that I want to be something. And so these desires often come into conflict. The mediation of this conflict is how we produce an objective conception of self through what is known as mutual recognition. I recognize that you are an individual with your own freedom and capable of making your choices, and you recognize that I am an individual capable of making my choices. And so we rely upon each other's judgment in relation to ourselves and an objective world from which we cannot know independently. I require your insight and you require mine. However, this often begins as a one-sided relationship where an individual establishes a moral order in order to achieve their ends over others. This is then mediated through history, through individuals fighting against this tyranny, and this is what Hegel described as the lord and bondsman relationship, in which the work of the bondsman is what progresses history. This is why Hegel argued that the slave enslaves themselves, which may sound horrific, but what Hegel was really saying is that a slave mentality is something which is self-imposed, and that once rejected, you are no longer a slave. You are actively fighting against slavery, and so could not be adequately described as a slave. So an identity can only be true if it's fully actualized within the individual and in their actions, once they internalize it. So ethics and politics are the epistemological engine of history, moving us forward through time. So history becomes progressive. We become better and better, and we are knowing ourselves more and more. The absolute was first coined by Schelling, who was a close friend of Hegel. Hegel takes this and develops what he calls absolute spirit. Spirit, as you remember from the beginning, is this essence of existence, this conscious being coming to know itself. Absolute spirit absolutely knows itself as this consciousness, as the basis of all truth and all reality, and so it is God. But this spirit is present throughout all of this development. Its substance is instantiated in every particular event moving through history until it culminates in itself. And so all of history, religion, and philosophy is God remembering himself, which is why Hegel's last words were, "Only one man understood me, and even he didn't understand me." And if you would like to see more on Hegel, I have 4 lectures on Hegel in my course, An Introduction to Western Philosophy, which you can find in the link below. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and as always, try to gain some perspective.
So that's all clear, I'm sure, to everyone. But I did want to sort of introduce this idea because I think you can see that much of this is operative still in contemporary discourse. When we're talking about Lacan and antagonisms, this is still linked to this fundamental material idea uh, that goes back through Lacan, through Freud, et cetera, et cetera. The idea that there's a material reality out there that we're actualizing, and that in order to achieve, complete subjectivity, whatever radical subjectivity, we have to go through all these sorts of things and reconcile all of these relationships with a kind of reality, and hopefully we're moving towards, some sort of truth, as it were. Not one that's clearly obvious, nor is it one that is sort of describable as heaven on earth or all those other crazy things. It's just simply this idea that, maintaining a certain ethical position, confronting moral problems, all of these things are part of living a life in the world. And a whole variety of philosophies move in that direction in the 20th century. The problem, of course, for those on the left is that in the era after the era of Stalin and World War II, there is a reintroduction or re-examination in the post-war period, particularly in France, but certainly in Germany at the same time, a re-examination of Hegel, for example. There's a Hegelian revival in the post-World War II period that leads us to a whole variety of other kinds of approaches. So the things that I was talking about in terms of the structuralism that influences Lacan eventually, it's not identical to Freud. He's taking some other kinds of ideas about Freud and sort of trying to work through them, because Freud never fully, got them to work out, or that he had a specific point of view. And Lacan is looking towards more certain kinds of generalities, things that are in some ways more French rather than Austrian. And when the speaker in the little bit here refers to drives, that's exactly what Lacan is talking about. And so hence, when Zizek is referring to both Lacan and Hegel, he's trying to show that we haven't really, it's not so much that we should have gone further, it's just simply that there's all these things that are still at work, and that we need to see their relationship to the categories, as it were, to, what is our to reconcile the human relation to science, et cetera, et cetera. And that this is the same path that Marx took. Certainly Marx did this with the humanist path that we've identified, but also the scientific path of the later Marx that people have begun to rediscover. And so you have all these things all there. And in the 21st century, I think that we still need to sort of look at this stuff and not get too baffled, learn to not, buy it whole hog, but assess it in a way that, for example, we can consider certain relations. I'm not going to talk about Aristotle here, but, when we think about this, this is one little table that comes further down in the Arthur article, but it is, in fact, a way in which we think about everyday engagements. That is, walking into the store and confronting the price of a commodity, of some object, and that the price, there are people who believe that you can actually negotiate the price. I don't believe that. I just am not, I don't think I have the tools to do that. But some books on negotiation say that much like that guy who was giving advice for Feldo, et cetera, about don't ever accept the price first off, particularly in terms of medical care. But the fact is, price is negotiable because it's not value. It has some relation to value, and that's this whole question that Arthur is sort of reflecting on, which is the big question that Marxists have been engaging, and that is the value form question of, what's going on here. Is it, how real is it? How applicable is it? Is it always about labor? All of those things are there, and, you're sort of collapsing that into the single moment where I just need a stick of gum, damn it. It is, it may seem ponderous, but it's not really very ponderous. It's just simply that, oh, okay, this, I make a system of decisions on this basis, and all of these other things are at work. And so sometimes it's just not that important, and you sort of go, oh, well, I'm paying $3 for gas now, and well, but I don't go anywhere. So if I wait a little longer, perhaps the price will go down a little bit, and I don't really need to go anywhere. And so I'm going to wait until that happens. And then I made the comparison to the gas for my lawnmower, which is really interesting, only because unleaded or leaded gas is incredibly expensive. Non-additive gas is intolerably expensive, which it shouldn't be actually. But that's a whole other set of questions. So anyway, I want to introduce this Arthur article because I think it does, in a manner of speaking, look at these Hegelian questions as were sort of described for the encyclopedia, which, yes, is the simplest or the simpler of the things to read about Hegel, and to talk about being, essence, notion, all the science stuff that, and you can see here that there is some connection still between objective things and subjective things, that they're all interconnected. This is sort of the point of reading Hegel, is that you're not simply collapsing everything into some sort of spirit that we could get, God or something. No, rather, we're trying to come to grips with all of these things that appear to us, things that are real to us or not so real, things that would deceive us, things that would challenge our ability to do correct action, things that appeal to us as beauty or that create drives. All of those things are there, and so they're fairly complete. Now, the point of the encyclopedia is, not unlike a whole bunch of other folks, note that the 18th and 19th century are times when all kinds of folks are writing things like encyclopedias, that it becomes literally a state project to be able to expand knowledge in a quote unquote objective way. And so coming to grips with all of these things is part of, sort of the job of intellectuals. And, that's kind of what philosophers are doing during that period. And needless to say, it's, Marx has a certain conflict about it because, it's sort of this idle activity on the one hand, and, that it, even though he trained in it, he just, none of this gets really applied. And I think he has a certain amount of guilt about it. And so he wants to try and reconcile these things. Therefore, that's why I think he combines all of these particular things that are going on, which are really interesting and important during the 19th century, revolution, growth, industrial revolution, trade, blah, 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 all those things. It was very exciting. Equally so, a brutal time as well. So anyway, these are the areas covered by the encyclopedia. I just want to use that as an aside, but most of what Arthur is talking about here is about some certain kinds of material matters that I try to help you understand the problem or differences on what money represents. Money, he tries to disentangle in the middle of this, that it's not about gold. Gold is only one way of doing it, but it is not the way of doing it. I think he's trying to dislocate people from that kind of thing, and then ultimately get back to the question of universals, and that labor can have some connection to it. And then he gets to a certain thing, which I would assert may sound very complicated. So the easiest way to, or at least in my little brain, and with all due respect to Noam Chomsky, who may or may not be dead yet, is the idea that we can create some of these categories and see how much of our Marxian kind of analysis here, a critique of political economy, has a certain sets of language problems which are not too horrible, and that they're easily definable, and that when we make the analogy with language or to language, we can sort of clarify some of these relations, not perfectly, not in a mathematical way, but simply in ways that allow us to see some of the relationships among things. So that's kind of what Arthur's trying to do in this article. Don't be sad if you don't understand it. It is a little complicated, and it may not make any sense at the end, but for me, it makes at least the Hegelian questions clearer. It makes the connection to post-structural philosophy better, like Zizek, etc. and sort of explains a whole bunch of other things, which I think are very quite useful. The texts, the humanist texts on the history of money, kind of sort of talk about some of these things, but don't quite get to the point. And I think this one actually, this particular kind of approach is actually a little better. And you know, I like thinking that that's a way of clarifying our ability to talk about Marx, to talk about capital, and to talk about as it were, a 21st century kind of integration of how capital or analysis of capital can help us out. So that's kind of where I am with this. I might as well stop. This is a point in the text where the table, he introduces the table and, you know, goes a lot of yammering to talk about 3 pounds. So whatever. And he's trying to talk about, you know, in Hegelian way, what goes on with the circuits of capital. So by beginning with Hegel, he shows that Marx is simply following, not slavishly, but is adapting a Hegelian path to make this make the argument about the circuit of capital work. So in my little brain, I like thinking this actually helps explain volumes 2 and 3 of Capital. So there was a point to doing all of this, and there's some books here that are worth covering. So that's kind of all I have to say at the current moment. That gives me 7 or so minutes left. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not at home, so I always wonder. I have a couple of questions. I got in here late. Were you talking about Australian philosopher Peter Singer?
Yes.
Right. I'm sorry I missed that part. You know, he wrote a book about animal liberation, which he revamped recently. It was like 20 something years old. I have it with me actually. I put a photo of it.
It's a little wacky. Well, not wacky, but you know, you can see his point of view. Let's put it that way.
What's wacky about it? I haven't read it all yet.
Oh, well, Singer maybe that is one side of his philosophical activity. That is the whole, you know, essentially the vegan question, or the question of animal cruelty and all those things. It's really important work. It is, I think, you know, what makes him a great or a giant in philosophy. And he talks about it on a daily basis. He used to tweet about it, which I find really interesting. But yes, I agree with you, Lane. It has a certain eugenic element to it.
Yeah, I think he's defended that in some way, but I double checked that how he put it.
But you know, his logic is hard to refute at some level. But yes, I agree with you about the eugenics conclusion of it. But the arguing of it, I think, is still worthwhile. Anyway.
And the other two things, I mentioned gas last week. Also, it's like $3.50 a gallon where you are, something like that. Yes.
Sorry?
You mentioned gas in your neighborhood, your area being like $3.50 per gallon, I believe, last week, perhaps.
$3.40.
$3.40, yes. Well, the cheapest gas I found here last week was $4.40. So, you know, be thinking about paying what I have to pay for this for years and years and years in LA, where we have more cars.
Well, the height of gas for you guys is up in the $7-8 amount, wasn't it?
Yeah, and if you buy from the major, like 76 or Shell, you pay the most, definitely the discount companies. But even the cheapest ones were pretty high at some point. Yes, it's pretty bad last year. And the third thing I wanted to mention is, why do you have a lawn?
The what? I'm sorry?
Why do you have a lawn? LAWN.
In lawn? What?
Yeah, a grass. I assume you have a regular grass green lawn that you use your mower for.
Why do I use it at all? Or why do I?
Yeah, why do you have a lawn? I just have
well,
something else.
Because it's always been there, I guess, and I haven't taken any steps to turn it into concrete or something else. I may simply, well, I'm going to leave it at some point, probably more likely. But yes, I think it's problematic. For example, I mulch my lawn. I have a whole approach to not trimming it too very much or tightly. I don't. It shouldn't look like a golf, green, a putting green or something. I think of it more as a collection of sort of crazy stuff. But yes, I still mow it because anyway, because I've always mowed it, I guess, and I have to change that.
Yes, please. I think Lane said something about it being lawns being a habitat for some animals. Well, so is a non-lawn habitat. Like California here, you get like a desert-ish lawn, and there's creatures that would like that, I assume. But regardless, it's a huge waste of water, as we all should.
Well, I'm thinking Prof. Ann is saying that her lawn, it's not all bluegrass, which
Yes.
exactly.
I said green grass, but okay.
Well, it's not a monoculture.
Right.
And so, in writing, expectations of neighbors and keeping up your value and property is kind of not a tightrope, but you kind of have to, I'm there too, where I mow mine occasionally, but I don't encourage the grass, so I hear you.
Well, unless it's illegal, somebody has to step forward and change things by being an outstanding rebel of some kind in this case, which is kind of ridiculous that it's considered such a bad thing.
I live in a largely what I would consider a slightly redneck neighborhood, and I don't think that it's not a lawn I want to die on. Let's just put it out.
Question. At the beginning, I think he's quoting Marx there, where he says he was fascinated on the ability of money to make opposites embrace. That's opposite classes.
Opposite classes?
Yeah, is that the opposites he's talking about in that quote?
Not class opposites. Or are you referring to his need to make money?
No. It's a quote there, I think, in the first paragraph. Uh-oh, did I lose it? Says, then pride of place must go to Marx, who was fascinated from early on by the ability of money to, quote, make opposites embrace.
Oh, right. The dialectic of that. That is to make, that exchange is essentially, or circuits of capital operate as a system of kind of, all of the movements are dialectic. Let's put it that way. That we make motions, that capital moves in a dialectic way. It's not to reduce it to dialectics, but I think that's, it is this kind of.
It's not like it's not a specific set of opposites. It's just in general opposites embrace.
That's right. This is
okay.
The whole problem of Marx is when he talks about generalities or universals as opposed to particulars, it gets a little ugly. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you got to kind of remember where it is, kind of, or figure it out. Yeah, okay.
There's a table in, I think it's Mosley's book. Well, maybe it's not Mosley's book. It's an article. I think I was reading at the same time. It showed all the different variations of what he meant when he said value. And it's just like, I'm going, I don't know. There are 20 different versions here. What am I supposed to do? It's a little troubling at a lexical level, but and German's not my field. So it's just, you have to just sort of, go with it and see where that, where the best generalities are. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But it's not. That doesn't discredit the idea that if you did a full concordance of Marx talking about value, you would not always get the same value. I mean, the same word, the same concept. So it's not embodied in the word. It's really more about, context.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's got so many forms.
and you just have to relax when you look at it, because otherwise you reduce it to certain arguments or models, and then you have a whole ideological thing you got to sort of agree with on that, and often that gets you into trouble. Let's put it that way.
So sometimes when they say orthodox economics, they're talking about Ricardian.
Yes, Smithian, whatever, the sort of non, the orthodox economics of the time. The market should be free, whatever. All of those, the Misesian kind, Hayek kind of, they're just individuals running around colliding with each other. Anybody else? Animal rights and that kind of stuff's not my area, so I just, I try to respect Peter Singer. I haven't read very much Singer. I don't mind reading Singer. It's just that I have other things to read. That's all. It's like reading Dummett. I don't read Dummett because it's whatever. It's kind of a dead end, That's not to say that Singer's a dead end. It's just a position on animal rights that's really important, and I respect the importance of it.
Appreciate that. I don't know. What was that? Dummett? I don't even know what that is.
Dennis Dummett, David Dummett, whatever. Anyway, another philosopher. He's the he's the latest Rorty, whatever. Anyway, it's a certain kind of pragmatism. Let's put that. That's not even a good way of referring to it, but he managed to get himself in trouble by getting in. Who did he get in a fight with? Damn it! He got into a fight by calling somebody an asshole or something. It was just like it's just stupid stuff. How philosophers get into trouble. Anyway. Sorry, I digress. There's a couple of articles recently where that refer to David Dummett's trying to cause trouble with Stephen Jay Gould, I think. It seems like dementia at one level. So but it's there. I mean, that you can't sort of ignore this shit, but it's just there. And then anyway. There's a long article that's in, I think, a moderately recent issue of Jacobin that refers to this tedious little fight.
That video, that was a great choice on Hegel.
That's as simple as I could find it. There are a lot of complicated ones. It's really hard to find simple stuff. But I think it's important to have a position on Hegel, and then to understand that, Marx is still engaging Hegel because he had to deal with it. The young Hegelians, blah, 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 Feuerbach. The sort of evolution of Marx's thought is to sort of go through this and go, okay, well, I sort of agree with Hegel on this, and this, but I got to do this other thing because there's a reality out here, and you got to sort of get into it, engage it, and that's kind of. I agree that lawns are habitats for lawnmowers. Inevitably, you're sort of stuck with the damn thing. But, I run my lawnmower, with all due respect, maybe once every 3 weeks or something, maybe once a month, despite the summer, despite the growth stuff. So I'm not, doing horrible pollution. My lawn's not that big. But I do have a bunch of foliage I got to deal with. So anyway. And I think I'm too weak to push a push mower. But I have thought of getting a push mower. I just happen to still have my, whatever mower. Push mowers actually, the push mowers cost as much as a machine mower, with all due respect to value.
I have a mower. The push mower is good if you have a flat, very even turf and if you mow it regularly, because if you let it get too tall, then it doesn't work as well.
Yes, exactly. But I don't mow that often, so I try to, I trade off that part of my little labor.
Yeah. Well,
My lawn looks okay. Let's put it that way.
I moved my push mower today, but I have not actually used it. I don't even know when I used it last, because my lawn is not flat. It's not smooth,
Ditto.
too big, and I don't cut it enough to have it work properly. Maybe someday.
Mine's even enough so it doesn't stand out. Let's put it that way. I seek conformity.
Uh-huh.
So, Prof. Van, I put this in chat, but I was intrigued. Is there a book called Hegel and Haiti or something?
Yeah, probably could be. It could be the basis for the discussion of the Caribbean Revolution, I guess.
Okay, all right.
I think that's what it refers to.
Well, I was intrigued. Yeah, Adnan actually mentioned it on a recent Guerrilla History podcast.
Yeah.
And the others seem to know about it, and I just never thought there would be a connection between the two, Hegel and Haiti, but here we are. And so, yeah, I'm gonna look into that. So,
Oh, yeah. Susan Buck Morse is a sociologist or historian or whatever. Is it her? No, it's what's her name? I'm confusing her with Scopel. What's her name? Forget what I just said. Anyway, Susan Buck Morse writes good stuff.
okay.
This book, I think, of hers is on the post-colonial moment. So it's kind of Hegel thinking about other stuff, I guess, thinking more globally, I guess, about the French it's about the French Revolution. Let's be clear about it. It's Hegel engaging with the revolutionary activity. So.
Okay, not the French Revolution rather than the Haitian Revolution,
no, not the
where
current.
they ousted France.
I think that's what it's about, but that
Okay.
I haven't read it, so this is but it seems to be a very popular whatever. The arresting claim that Hegel's renowned master-slave dialectic was directly inspired by the contemporaneous Haitian Revolution. Pretty cool. And similarly, Angela Davis's doctoral dissertation was going to be about Kant and the French Revolution. So this is still an important thing to talk about.
Oh, fascinating.
So
I see what you're scrolling through. It says it's on JSTOR. So I'm gonna look, see if I can find it.
Well, I think you can find, or if you give me a moment, I'll probably find a free copy.
Thank you. I know you're wonderful. You don't have to, but
down a free copy. But anyway, that, as I said, that Peter Singer book I'll put up in
oh, that would be great.
I'll see if I can find this Haiti, which is also quite interesting, mainly because it combines all the current interests in settler colonialism, blah, 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 and it allows us to, and Buck Morse has written other good things on Frankfurt School stuff. So her other books have that as well.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah, I'm sorry I brought up that the personal contradiction, my ethical qualms of lawnmowers.
I like Hegel because
I'm a 10-year-old mower. Everyone get over it.
I like Hegel because he seems to plug the gap between, like you were saying, sort of science and religion.
Yes.
And people still think that they're sort of diametrically opposed, but there are a lot of people pursue science still
Yes.
because of the desire to seek the answers as to whether there's a God and all that stuff. So, um, but he sort of plugs that gap nicely.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, he does.
yeah.
Well, no different than I think most philosophers try to deal with, at least in the 21st century.
Yeah. But he sort of explains it. I think it's also because of when he was around, you know.
Well, you got to remember that you had state religions that you're writing during a period where you've got fairly oppressive state religious institutions that essentially run the government, which is what's coming back now.
It is.
10 Commandments in the classroom, remember?
Yeah.
They had an interview on CNN with the woman who co-sponsored that bill, and she is a dangerous person. And she is a person who I can just see Trump trying to make her his vice president. It's very scary. But anyway.
What's her name?
Varela, something like that. She's a state legislator in Louisiana. I mean, she's very committed to this 10 Commandments deal. On Twitter, there's people proposing versions of the 10 Commandments that are all cleaned up, but that's a very liberal task there.
Well, there's a lot of that. Islam is a religion of war and terror stuff flying around again.
Well, if you go to the first commandment is about, in its full articulation, it has that whole thing about worshiping fake false idols and shit.
Yeah,
right?
everyone's fucking. People need to learn. All religions are religions of war and terror and peace.
Well,
so therefore, no religions are of war and terror and peace because they're all used to justify the actions of humans, no matter what they're doing.
Well,
if it's good, it's bad.
What about grade school kids reading the 10 Commandments and worrying about adultery? Why?
Well, this is the thing. It hadn't stopped anyone, has it? Even vicars, I don't think that's a problem. I don't mind learning about the 10 Commandments as long as you learn everything else. I loved religion at school, but I'm not religious. Don't believe in God, but I like to know what people are thinking. It's like fuck me. These people are insane. But then you find out a lot of them aren't.
I just find it weird that they would legislate that you have to have an 11:14 thing posted of the 10 Commandments.
Oh yeah, that's different.
In your class,
I do believe in religious education, but not religious indoctrination. Should know about religion. It's quite important.
And yet that's the claim they make when they say they're going to ban certain books, right? It's just so,
Exactly. Because they want their religion to be learned about and nobody else's.
I mean, people got to lighten up.
Of the 10 Commandments are about worshiping God, basically, and
having sex with neighbors' animals,
being religious. So, and then there's honor your father and your mother, and then the things you should not do. Don't murder.
What father and your mother are dickheads, though?
They're not differentiating here.
I'm being pedantic.
Maybe when they say your father, they really mean God.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
And then they say, you shall not murder, commit adultery, steal, lie against your neighbor. and you shall not covet.
Unless you're a Baptist minister, then you can do the lot, make millions, get private jets.
12-year-old girls, whatever. Jeez.
Yeah, whatever. Fill your boots, man.
Yeah.
So can you bear false witness against somebody else's neighbor?
Yeah, false witness. Hmm.
I wonder how many of these commandments Trump has violated.
What was it? I love it. I think it's Woody Allen. Woody Allen did a bit in his stand-up about what was a vodka commercial. I got offered a vodka commercial, and I turned it down because and then I thought, oh, I could do with the money. So I went to see the rabbi. I said, Rabbi, I've been offered a vodka commercial, and I don't know whether to go for it. And he said, don't do it. It's immoral. And then I turned on the TV about 6 weeks later. 1 o'clock, I've been out at 1 o'clock in the morning, and there's my rabbi selling vodka. And then he goes, and then I saw him, was it? Then I saw him on a chat show, and he was so drunk, he was trying to describe the Ten Commandments, and he ended up tailing off and describing the seven dwarfs or something like that. It's really funny stuff.
Seven deadly dwarfs. Anyway, thank you very much. On that note, thank you very much for your attention, and we can go back to other matters. I'll put up the links. As I said, I think I have a copy of the Peter Singer introduction to Hegel, and so I'll put that up in the Discord. And I may have some other things to yammer about, and we'll see where we are tomorrow with that as well. I may either do more Hegel or and finish up this Chris Arthur article on money, or do something else that will help us get to